Welcome to the Therapy Show podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Mustard. In each episode, I interview a seasoned and knowledgeable talk therapist from the counseling world to glean valuable insights, techniques, and tools that you can apply to your practice and your life. And if you're considering a career in the counseling field or just want to hear about what it's like to be a talk therapist, then this is the podcast for you. Well, hi, friend. Welcome back to another episode. In this week's Put It Into Practice episode, I'm sharing how social media affects our mental health. But before I dive into this topic, I want to remind you that my other Put It Into Practice episodes, they release on Saturday. Last Saturday's episode was all about answering your listener questions. So I want to remind you, if you have a listener question, feel free to send me a message on Instagram. You can even send me an email, and my email address is lisa@lisamustard.com. Feel free to ask me anything about therapy, mental health, relationships, and know that I will ask your question anonymously on the podcast. However, I want you to know ahead of time that please do not email me if you are in crisis. I don't monitor my email or my messages 24/7, and that really wouldn't be the best way to get help. So if you are in crisis and you need immediate support, you can always go to your local emergency room. You can also call or text 988, which is the Suicide Prevention Lifeline. And there's some amazing people who work there, so you'll get some really good support. All right, so let's talk about social media, how it affects our mental health. And I know how it affects mental health firsthand because I've struggled with some anxiety, anxious thoughts and feelings due to social media. I truly have. And how do I know my anxiety stemmed from social media? Well, I did an experiment. I took a few social media apps off my phone and purposefully stayed off of social media for a little while, especially one platform. I stayed off of there I was intentional about being only on there touch and go for about 2 weeks. And I'm happy to report that my anxiety did, in fact, decrease. What did I do instead? Instead of being on social media, I made it my intention to be more present focused. And I made an effort to connect with friends and family, either on the phone or face to face. So let's talk about the good and bad of social media, because there's definitely good and bad. I mean, social media has become an integral part of our daily lives. It connects us with friends and family, helps us stay informed, and even allows us to build and grow our personal and professional networks. But as with any technology, there are also downsides to its use. And studies have shown that excessive use of social media can lead to feelings of loneliness, depression, and anxiety. And I've linked the studies in my show notes, so be sure to check them out. You can see the links there. You can click on them and read all about the research of the studies. So the studies have shown that the use of social media can also lead to feelings of loneliness, depression, and anxiety in a few ways. So how might social media really harm our mental health? But studies have found an association between time spent on social media as well as the number of social media platforms used and symptoms of depression and anxiety. Most of these studies indicate that time spent on social media is correlated with depression and anxiety, but that doesn't necessarily mean that social media causes these problems. It's unclear whether using social media leads to depression and anxiety symptoms, or if people who are already more depressed or more anxious use social media more than their peers do, which makes sense. So I think that's something to be aware of. If you're already dealing with anxiety and depression symptoms, I wonder, do you notice if your symptoms increase when you're on social media? Okay, so however, there is research that suggests that social media use might, at least to some degree, lead to these symptoms. For example, in one study from 2020, people who deactivated their Facebook account for a month reported lower depression and anxiety, as well as increases in happiness and life satisfaction. Well, there you go. Researchers believe that one problem is that social media use can disrupt sleep, and poor sleep can lead to anxiety and depression. Think about that. Social media use at night disrupts sleep in a number of ways. People stay up late online. The light from the screen can disrupt one's circadian rhythm, and many people wake up in the night in order to check or respond to messages. And adolescents report that they use social media at night even when it affects their sleep. They worry that if they do not use their phone at night, they will miss out on potential social interactions online, which they believe would have a negative effect on their in-person social relationships. Also, adolescents report that their peers expect them to be online and available at night. And there is a social norm to respond to messages quickly, and they don't want to violate that norm by sleeping through their messages. So many adolescents report sleeping with their phone and checking it constantly at night. Oh my gosh, that really makes me sad for those kids. Another way is through social comparison. When people spend a lot of time on social media, they can't help but compare their own lives to the curated highlight reels they see on their feeds. This can make them feel like they are falling short and can lead to feelings of inadequacy and low self esteem. And another way is that social media can contribute to these feelings is by replacing face to face social interactions. And when people spend a lot of time on social media, they may start to prioritize virtual interactions over real life ones. And this can lead to feelings of isolation and loneliness as people may start to feel like they have fewer meaningful connections in their lives. Moreover, social media can also contribute to feelings of anxiety by amplifying feelings of FOMO, which is fear of missing out, as people become aware of many events and activities that they were not invited to. And lastly, social media can also contribute to feelings of depression as it can expose people to negative content such as cyberbullying, hate speech, or traumatic events, which can make them feel overwhelmed, anxious, and sad. Now, I don't know about you, but I can relate to many of these different points here. The one about poor sleep, in our house, everybody puts their phone in the kitchen at night, except for me when I'm on call. I have to have the phone near me. Or when my kids are out and we're expecting them kind of to be home later, I do keep the phone in the bedroom, but we do keep our phones in the kitchen charging out of our bedrooms. Another thing I talk about with our kids is that, Instagram or Facebook or whatever is people showing their curated highlight reels. That's not real life. Real life isn't perfect makeup all the time, isn't a perfect figure, isn't perfect nutrition. I mean, that's just people showing the highlight of their lives. Chances are, if you meet them on the street or see them at a store, they're not going to look like that. And you might even see them out in a restaurant and they're not eating like that they show on social media. I do want to point out the one about exposure to negative content and hate speech, traumatic events. I myself have had to cut back on the amount of news that I take in via social media. I've had to unfollow a lot of people. I feel as though on both sides on the political spectrum, there's so much that just riles me up, like on both sides. I honestly, I don't even look at it anymore. And I find myself to be a lot more peaceful, a lot happier, and a lot less anxious and depressed. Okay, so what can we do to mitigate the negative effects of social media on our mental health? Well, like I told you, one solution that I have done and I highly recommend is to take a break from social media. Set aside certain times of the day or week when you're not going to be on social media and stick to it. Another solution is to curate your feed, like I told you I just did, and unfollow or mute accounts that make you feel bad about yourself or the world, and follow accounts that are uplifting and positive. Lastly, it's important to remember that social media is a tool. It's not a substitute for real human connection. Make sure you're spending time with family and friends and engaging in activities that you enjoy offline. So maybe that means you need to take up a hobby. There's plenty of things out there that you could get into, right? Find a hobby, hang out with your friends, join a club. There's so many things that we've forgotten about because of the pandemic has kept us away from people. But now is the time you can get back out there, get out there into the world and start experiencing real life interactions, human connection. So I know that I've already talked about some of these tips that you can take, which I said, set your limits on social media, curate your feed, prioritize face-to-face interactions. And the second to last one is, I kind of mentioned this in the intro, is be aware of your own mental state when using social media. It's important to take notice of how you feel when using social media. If you notice that your mood starts to deteriorate, that's a hard word, deteriorate, try to take a break or limit your use. You have to be aware and you have to be mindful of what's going on with you in your mental state. Now, last but not least, seek professional help if needed. If you notice that your social media use is having a severe and persistent negative impact on your mental health, consider seeking professional help. A therapist or counselor can help you develop strategies for managing your social media use and addressing any underlying mental health concerns. It is important to note that everyone is different and what works for one person may not work for others. So it's important to experiment and find what works best for you. Now, I want to remind you guys that the therapy show with Lisa Mustard and the information provided by me is solely intended for informational and entertainment purposes and is not a substitute for advice, diagnosis, or treatment regarding medical or mental health conditions. Although I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, the views expressed on this podcast or on my website or any related content should not be taken for medical or psychiatric advice. Always consult with your physician before making any decisions related to your physical or mental health. I want to remind you guys that due to my schedule, I am unable to take therapy clients at this time, and that's why I've partnered with BetterHelp Online Counseling. BetterHelp connects you with a licensed mental health provider in your area who can help you via video calls, text messaging even, as well as phone calls. The best part is that it's truly very affordable. Plans start at around $65 a week, and you can get 10% off your first month when you go through my affiliate link, which is in the show notes. So BetterHelp is a sponsor of the podcast, and they help make it possible for me to produce content, professionally edit the show, and spread the word about mental and emotional health topics. Now, you guys, I've used online counseling platforms in the past for my own therapy and really, really love the convenience and affordability. I didn't have to leave my home or work to get to work with a licensed provider. Now, if you're wanting to work with someone face-to-face, there are many online directories out there that can match you with a licensed mental health provider. And I usually refer people to Psychology Today. So see the links in my show notes to learn more about BetterHelp as well as Psychology Today. Hey guys, before we end this episode, if you are liking my content, if you're liking my podcast, be sure to go over and leave me a 5-star review on the podcast platform of your choice. And if you are up for it, I'd love it if you left me a review as well. Well, that wraps up another episode of The Therapy Show with Lisa Mustard. I know there are hundreds of thousands of podcasts out there, and I'm thankful you've chosen to listen to mine.
Be sure to visit lisamustard.com to access the show notes and discover more fantastic content.
And I'd be grateful if you subscribe to the show. Thank you.